The emergency room was cased, doctors rushing, machines beeping, sirens wailing outside. But none of that mattered when Sophia Wright saw him, the unconscious man on the stretcher, the one the paramedics had just brought in. She knew that face. It was impossible. 15 years ago, her little brother Lucas vanished without a trace. No leads, no goodbye, just gone. And now here he was. But when he woke up, he looked her right in the eyes and said, "I don't know you." Sophia had spent over a decade living with a gaping hole in her heart, carrying the weight of unanswered questions, the sleepless nights, the desperate police searches, her parents slowly withering away from grief. It had all led to nothing. And now fate had thrown him back into her life only for him to have no memory of her. Something wasn't right, and she was about to find out what. Before we dive, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And while you're here, hit that like button, share with your friends, and subscribe so you never miss a story that will leave you speechless. Now let's get into it. Lucas had been found on the side of a highway, barely breathing. No ID, no phone, no indication of where he had come from. But there was something else. Something terrifying. A scar. A deep, old wound across his wrist. One that hadn't come from the accident. Had he been hurt before? Had someone kept him captive? The doctors diagnosed a concussion and signs of past head trauma, explaining his memory loss. But Sophia wasn't convinced. There was something missing. Lucas wasn't just another lost patient. Someone had taken him. Someone had stolen 15 years of his life, and that someone might be coming back for him. Sophia sat beside the hospital bed, her entire body tense, fingers gripping the edge of the mattress as if letting go would make him vanish again. The room was filled with the steady beeping of machines, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead, and the occasional murmur of nurses passing in the hall. But to Sophia, it all faded into the background, because nothing else mattered right now. She stared at the unconscious man in front of her, her chest tightening with every shallow rise and fall of his breath. She didn't need a DNA test. She didn't need confirmation from the doctors. She knew. This was her brother. The scar above his left eyebrow. The one he got when he was 6 after a nasty fall off his bike, when he insisted he didn't need training wheels. The way his fingers curled slightly inward when he slept. A habit she used to tease him about when they were kids, calling him the little pretzel. Even the barely noticeable dimple on his right cheek. The one that only appeared when he laughed. It was Lucas. But the boy she remembered wasn't the one lying in front of her now. Lucas had been a whirlwind of energy, a laughing, mischievous child who was always running ahead of her on the playground, sneaking extra cookies when he thought no one was looking, begging for just 5 more minutes of bedtime stories. This man, this broken shell of a person, was unrecognizable. His face was pale, hollowed out by exhaustion. His lips were cracked. His hair, once thick and wild, was now matted and uneven. Dark bruises lined his arms, his wrists raw and marked as if they had been bound for who knows how long. Her stomach turned. What had happened to him? Where had he been for 15 years? And why was he back now? A sharp intake of breath pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up as the doctor approached, flipping through a thick medical chart. His expression was careful, neutral, too controlled. "He's stable for now," he said, his voice clinical, detached. "But there's something you should know." Sophia felt her pulse quicken. The doctor's gaze flicked up to meet hers, then over his shoulder, as if making sure no one else was listening. His voice dropped lower. "The paramedics found him on the side of a highway," he continued, alone, barely breathing. Sophia's stomach clenched. She swallowed hard. "Where exactly?" The doctor hesitated before answering. "Just outside the city limits, near an abandoned service station." Her mind raced. That stretch of highway was isolated. Hardly anyone used it unless they were passing through. He hadn't just collapsed there. Someone had left him there, dumped him like discarded trash. Her throat tightened. No ID, no phone, nothing to indicate where he came from or where he was going. Sophia's breath came out in a shaky exhale. It didn't make sense. People don't just appear out of nowhere after 15 years, especially not like this. Her gaze drifted back to Lucas, his face unnaturally still against the stark white hospital pillow. And then came the detail that made her blood run cold. The doctor hesitated before flipping to a new page in the chart. "There's something else," he said. Sophia's skin prickled. "What?" The doctor set the clipboard down on the counter and folded his arms. "There's an old scar on his wrist." He exhaled through his nose. "A deep one. Definitely not from this accident." Sophia felt like the floor had dropped out beneath her. Her fingers instinctively clenched into fists, her nail digging into her palms. "Can I see it?" she whispered. The doctor nodded, carefully lifting Lucas's limp arm and rolling up the sleeve of his hospital gown. Sophia sucked in a breath. A jagged, silvery scar stretched across his wrist, a scar that didn't look like it came from an accident. It looked intentional. Her entire body went rigid. Her voice wavered. Do you know how old it is? The doctor hesitated. It's hard to say, but judging by the tissue, it's been there for years. Years. Sophia's breath hitched. Her brother had been out there somewhere for over a decade. And if that scar was any indication, he hadn't been free. He had been trapped. Her hands trembled as she reached out, brushing her fingers over his wrist, tracing the scar lightly. A deep, sickening fear settled in her stomach. How many times had he tried to escape? Her chest tightened painfully as new, horrifying questions took root in her mind. Where had he been? Who had taken him? And most terrifying of all, were they still looking for him? Her heart pounded, the weight of the realization crashing over her like a tidal wave. If someone had kept him hidden away for all these years, then they wouldn't just let him go. And they certainly wouldn't stop now. The days that followed were filled with questions, fear, and an overwhelming sense of unease. Lucas remained in the hospital, his condition stabilizing, but the fog in his mind refused to lift. Sophia tried everything, showing him old photographs, telling him stories from their childhood, even playing his favorite song from when they were kids. But nothing seemed to break through the haze. Sometimes she would catch him staring at her, his brows furrowed, as if he were on the verge of remembering something important. And then, just as quickly as it came, the recognition would flicker out, his expression fading back into detached confusion. It was agonizing. The little brother she had spent her entire life mourning was right here, yet he felt farther away than ever, and she had no idea how to bring him back. But that wasn't the only thing that haunted her, because something was wrong. It started small, a lingering feeling of being watched when she walked down the hospital corridors, a nurse flipping too quickly through Lucas's chart when she asked about his medication, the way conversations would stop when she entered the room, replaced by uncomfortable glances and forced smiles. But then, the unease turned into something more concrete. Sophia first noticed him 2 days after Lucas was admitted. He didn't stand out at first. He wasn't in a doctor's coat or hospital scrubs, no visitor's badge. He was dressed too well. A crisp, dark suit, polished shoes, a stillness about him that felt wrong. He wasn't like the other visitors. He didn't have the worried, frantic energy of someone waiting for updates on a loved one. He wasn't pacing the hallway, eyes flicking anxiously to the ICU doors. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, his dark eyes moving deliberately, too deliberately. From the nurse's station to Lucas's room, watching. Sophia's pulse quickened. She pretended to focus on a clipboard at the reception desk, her ears tuned to his conversation. I'm looking for a patient. His voice was smooth, too measured, too calm. Young male, brought in 2 nights ago. No identification. Sophia's heart slammed against her ribs. The receptionist, oblivious to the warning bells blaring in Sophia's head, offered a polite but firm reply. I'm sorry, sir. We can't release patient information without proper credentials. The man didn't argue, didn't press. He simply nodded. But as he turned to leave, his gaze snapped to Lucas' room for the briefest second. Then he was gone. Sophia's skin prickled with unease. Who was he? And how did he know about Lucas? Her stomach churned with dread as she made her way to the hospital's security office. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but when the guard pulled up the visitor logs, she felt the air leave her lungs. That man, the one in the suit, had been coming to the hospital before Lucas even woke up, before Lucas had even been identified. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the records. He had been here twice, once the night Lucas was admitted and once the morning after. Both times he had asked about the same patient. He wasn't just watching, he was waiting, waiting for Lucas to wake up, waiting for something else. Sophia's heart pounded as she returned to Lucas's bedside that night, her mind racing. Why was this man watching him? What did he know? And more importantly, what was he afraid Lucas might remember? She stared at her brother's pale face, his breathing even, his eyes closed. And that's when she noticed it. The IV bag, the clear plastic pouch hanging from its metal pole, dripping a steady, regulated dose of medication into his veins. Sophia reached for his chart. Her fingers tightened around the paper as she scanned the list of drugs administered. One name stood out, midazolam, a sedative. Her breath caught. Why? Lucas had a concussion, a fractured rib, dehydration, but he wasn't agitated or combative. So why was he being given a sedative? And then she saw the authorization signature, a name she didn't recognize. A doctor who didn't even work in this department. Sophia's blood ran cold. Someone had been drugging him, not to help him, not to treat him, to keep him weak, to keep him from remembering. Her grip tightened on the paper, her knuckles turning white. Someone was still trying to control, and she had no doubt they were still watching. It started subtly, the unease, the way nurses hesitated when she asked who had approved Lucas's medication, the receptionist who suddenly didn't remember the man in the suit. And then the power went out. For a split second, the entire hospital plunged into darkness. The hum of machines fell silent. Sophia's heart lurched into her throat. Nurses murmured in confusion, scrambling as backup generators kicked in, flooding the hallways with a dim flickering light. Sophia's chest constricted with fear. Something was wrong. She didn't hesitate. She ran, down the hall, past the nurses, straight to Lucas's room. The door was slightly ajar. Her breath came out in ragged gasps as she shoved it open, and froze. The bed was empty. The IV line dangled over the edge, a slow drip of liquid pooling onto the tile. The heart monitor still beeped steadily, but there was no one there. Sophia felt like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. She whipped around, scanning the hallway, her vision blurring with panic. Her voice trembled. Lucas? Nothing. Only the distant murmur of hospital staff. Only silence. Sophia's blood ran ice cold. Her worst fear had just come true. He was gone. Sophia's pulse thundered in her ears as she stood frozen in the doorway of Lucas's hospital room. The bed was empty. The blankets, once neatly tucked, were now crumpled, the IV line dangling off the edge like an abandoned lifeline. The heart monitor still beeped steadily, a cruel mockery of the fact that he was no longer there. He was gone. No, no, no! Her mind screeched to a halt, then immediately raced forward, scrambling for logic, for anything that made sense. Had he woken up and wandered off? Had a nurse moved him? Was this some kind of mistake? Then she noticed something. The security camera in the corner of the room. It was turned away. Sophia's breath hitched. That camera was always pointed toward the patient's bed. Always. Someone had tampered with it. A chill crawled down her spine. This wasn't just a disappearance. This was a kidnapping. Again. A wave of nausea crashed over her. History was repeating itself, and she refused to let it happen. Not again. Never again. She burst into the hospital's security office, barely registering the startled expressions of the guards inside. "My brother is missing," she gasped, slamming her hands onto the desk. "Pull up the footage from his room, now." The guard nearest to her frowned. "Ma'am, we can't just—" "Now," she snapped, her voice sharp with panic. The guards exchanged wary glances before one of them sighed, rolling his chair toward the monitor. His fingers clacked against the keyboard, screens flickering as he brought up the security feeds. Sophia held her breath. The footage loaded, time-stamped just 30 minutes prior. Lucas was asleep in bed. Everything seemed normal. Then, a flicker, a glitch. The screen warped, distorting into jagged lines of static before going completely dark. Sophia's stomach dropped. What happened?" she whispered. The guard frowned, replaying the footage. The same thing happened again. Every camera with a view of Lucas's room glitched at the exact same time. Sophia clutched the back of the chair, her knuckles white. This wasn't an accident. This was planned. Someone had known exactly what they were doing. Her entire body felt like it was made of ice as she pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed. The line rang once, twice, before the operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? Sophia could barely keep her voice steady. My brother has been kidnapped from the hospital. You need to send someone, now. The dispatcher started asking questions, too many questions. Sophia didn't have time for this. She was already moving, already thinking ahead. The police assured her they'd investigate, but she couldn't just sit around and wait. And then, just as panic began to sink its claws into her chest, her phone buzzed. Unknown number, Sophia's breath hitched. Her thumb hovered over the screen, dread pressing against her rib cage. Then slowly she swiped to answer. A disguised voice, low, measured, chilling, spoke on the other end. Stop looking for him. Her breath caught in her throat. The voice wasn't yelling. It wasn't angry. It was a warning, and that was somehow worse. Sophia's grip tightened around the phone. Where is he? She demanded, her voice shaking with rage. Silence. Then, a second message. A text. A single location, a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Sophia's pulse spiked. She didn't think. She acted. Her tires screeched against the pavement as she tore through the darkened streets, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The address led her to the industrial district, where abandoned warehouses and rusted metal structures loomed like silent sentinels. She knew this was a trap. She knew she was walking straight into danger, but she didn't care. She couldn't lose Lucas. Not again. Sophia killed the engine, the night eerily still around her. No wind, no traffic, not even the distant hum of city life. It was like the world itself was holding its breath. Her stomach twisted. She crept inside, stepping over debris and rusted machinery. The air smelled of oil and decay, dust motes swirling in the weak beams of moonlight filtering through shattered windows. Then, a muffled sound, a whimper. Her head snapped toward the noise, adrenaline surging through her veins. And there, in the dim glow of a hanging bulb, she saw him, Lucas, tied to a chair. A fresh cut lined his cheek, blood trickling down his skin. His wrists were bound, his head lolling forward in exhaustion. Sophia's chest tightened painfully. Relief and fury crashed over her all at once. But before she could move, a voice from the shadows. "You should have left this alone." She spun around, and there he was, the man from the hospital, calm, smug, waiting. Sophia's pulse pounded. Her hands curled into fists, but she forced herself to stay steady, to not show fear. "What do you want with him?" she demanded. The man tilted his head, his lips curling into something just shy of a smile. "It's not about what I want," he said smoothly. "It's about what he knows." Sophia's blood ran cold. Lucas knew something, something dangerous, something that someone had been trying to keep buried for years, and they were willing to do anything to silence him. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Then, sirens, the distant wail of police sirens. The man's expression darkened, his jaw tensed. "You're going to regret this." Sophia didn't waste another second. She lunged forward, grabbing Lucas, yanking him free. He stumbled, weak from whatever they had done to him, but she held him up. They weren't losing each other again. Footsteps thundered outside. The police stormed in. Red and blue lights splashed against the warehouse walls. Officers tackled the man to the ground as he sneered up at Sophia. Even in cuffs, he didn't look afraid. This wasn't over. Sophia didn't care, because for the first time in 15 years, she had her brother back. The chaos of the night still clung to Sophia's mind. A whirlwind of flashing red and blue lights, muffled police radios, and the distant echo of footsteps on concrete. But now all of that was over. The nightmare had ended. Lucas was safe. Sophia sat beside him in the dim glow of his hospital room. The only sound, the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the rhythmic patter of raindrops against the window. She wasn't afraid he would disappear this time. She wasn't terrified that he'd be ripped away from her again. She wasn't waiting for him to vanish like a ghost all over again. Because this time he was really here. The police had taken the man into custody, though he refused to say much. No name, no details, just cold, knowing silence. He had looked right at her as they dragged him away, his lips curving into a smirk, as if this was just a game to him, as if he had lost a battle, not the war. Sophia didn't care. She wasn't afraid of him, because she had won. After 15 years of loss, grief, and searching for a miracle, she had her brother back. Lucas sat by the window now, his fingers lightly tracing the raindrops that streaked the glass. His gaze was distant, lost somewhere between memory and reality. Sophia hesitated at the doorway, watching him. He had been through hell, and yet he was still here, alive. Her hands trembled as she clutched something small, something worn and fragile, a faded teddy bear. The same one he had when he was a child, the one he refused to sleep without when he was little. She stepped forward, her throat tightening as she gently placed it beside him on the bed. Lucas didn't react at first. Then, after a long moment, he glanced down at it. At first, his expression was blank, curious, distant, like it was just another object in the room. Then, something changed. A flicker of recognition flashed across his face. His fingers twitched, brushing against the soft, worn fabric. Sophia felt her pulse quicken. Lucas stared at the teddy bear, his breathing suddenly uneven, his brows knitting together in concentration, like he was reaching for something just beyond his grasp. Sophia's chest ached, and then he froze. A sharp inhale, a flicker in his dark eyes. Then, and slowly, he turned to her. His lips parted, and for a moment she thought he wasn't going to say anything at all. Then, in the softest, most fragile whisper, "Sophia?" The air rushed out of her lungs. Her hands flew to her mouth, her vision blurring with tears. She nodded quickly, desperately. Yeah, she choked out, her voice breaking. It's me. Lucas blinked, his lip trembling slightly. Then, his expression shifted. Something unlocked. Something clicked into place. Recognition. Realization. Memories rushing back, crashing over him like a flood. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his hands gripping the sheets as if they were his only anchor to reality. Sophia saw it happen in real time, the puzzle pieces of his past sliding back into place. A tear slipped down his cheek, and then, his voice raw and barely more than a breath. I remember. Sophia let out a broken sob. 15 years. 15 years of grief, of searching, of praying for a miracle. And here it was, the little boy she had lost, buried under years of darkness, pain, and stolen memories, was still there, and now, at long last, he had finally found his way back. Sophia never stopped looking, and in the end, she found what she thought was lost forever. Some people spend their whole lives searching for answers, but Sophia never gave up. And in the end, she found what she thought was lost forever. If you want to hear more powerful, emotional stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel.